everyone. I'm Berit Anderson, COO of Future in Review and Strategic News Service. And I'm here today for our weekly video podcast with Mark Anderson, CEO of SNS and Pattern Computer. We are going to talk a little bit today about some of your work in both of those worlds, Mark, but specifically focused on the upcoming issue of Strategic News Service, which I'm hoping you might just start off by telling us a little bit about.
Well, I thought of the catchy name for this of Catching Cancer. And the subtext of it, or the subhead, is something to do with the story of infection in getting cancer. And I'm about half done writing the global report on this, so it's not done yet. But this is an issue I've been interested in for over a decade. And it's a really big story, I think.
So tell me a little bit more about where you came up with the idea for next week's issue.
As you know, Berit, as part of my family, we have a family member who unfortunately got cancer a long time ago. And she had throat cancer. And I started looking into the science at that time. And they had, in one of the papers I found online, taken photographs of cell cultures from throat cancer. And in those pictures were carefully identified HPV, human papilloma virus, HPV particles in the cells, but they were not identified as being causative. They were simply identified. And in that case, that member of our family had been able to be treated by MD Anderson Cancer Center, probably the best cancer center in the country. And that at that time, that group was run by a doctor named Kai Hong. And so the good news was, of course, that our family member was saved. And that's terrific. But it made me curious, and it made me wonder if there was a correlation between throat cancer and HPV, which at that time was not known. And so I wrote a paper about it. And then Kai Hong, who was an expert in that type of cancer, wrote his own paper, a peer-reviewed paper, which mine was not, about, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 months later. And that, I believe, was the first scientific peer-reviewed paper claiming either at least a correlation between that virus and throat cancer, later made very famous by Michael Douglas. So that was my beginning interest. And I very quickly started to wonder if there wasn't more than one cancer for which this might be true.
Well, it's interesting because in women's health, right, HPV has been a precursor to, I believe, ovarian cancer for a long time.
Cervical cancer.
Cervical cancer, yeah.
Very high correlation.
But it's interesting that it hasn't, given the very known close correlation in that case, or causation even. It's interesting that there hasn't been as much research around that in other cases.
I'm going to make one of probably several fairly blunt statements about the state of research in this, but it appears to me as though most, if not all, of the medical community in the United States went that direction. And they started treating all these issues as sexual transmitted diseases, period. Period. So that put it into a compartment which is very safe, I guess, and, not threatening, for us from a certain perspective. And the rest of the conversation we can have today, if you want to, could be about that error.
Right.
And what that meant to the future of research, into the real question of, was there a much larger story there?
Right, but the link between viruses and cancer.
Yeah.
And that I think that decision, it created a huge amount of stigma around HPV as an STI or
STD,
despite the fact that there was no way to tell in men at that time if anyone was infected with it. Right.
So both men and women get HPV. We'll probably go back down the HPV path in a minute, but as a sexual transmitted disease. And so that's well known. Both sexes have that problem.
Okay, so let's switch gears. So you found out about this, you noticed this HPV in the slides. You did some more research on that. Additional research was created, peer-reviewed research was created. But at the time, it was very unknown in the medical world that there might be a direct link between viruses in general and cancer.
Yes. Cancer was, yes. When I went to Stanford, cancer was explained as cosmic rays hitting DNA, causing random mutations, and occasionally, once in a great while, leading to cancer. And that was, or a chemical insult of some kind. If you took some kind of toxin that could also mutate your DNA.
So you made a pretty well publicized bet about this at one point with Nobelist Lee Hartwell. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So Lee is a great guy. He used to be the director of the Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center, so he has a lot of credibility in the world of cancer, in addition to his prize. And we had him at our FIRE conference twice. And so the first time he was on stage with me at FIRE, I don't know where I got the idea, but I just out of the blue, I said, I want to make a bet with you, Lee. He said, what is it? And I said, I want to bet that on what percentage of cancers are caused by infectious agents. And he said, okay. And I said, I'm betting half. That's at that time, that was an outrageous, even now it is. And he said, okay, I'll go for a third. So that was our first of two bets.
So who won that bet?
Well, I don't think win is the right attitude to take toward this thing between Lee and me. But I will say that about 3 years later, we had him back at FIRE. And I said, okay, I want to update the bet. He goes, okay. I said, I want to go to 2/3. He said, I'll go to half. So I wouldn't call that winning, but he's definitely coming my direction.
Mm-hmm. And so has there been other, like, how many what's the current state of this today? How many cancers are widely believed to be caused by infectious agents?
So I think I'll just say it again. Here's my next blunt statement. I believe that the industry, or whatever you want to call cancer business, is very far behind on this. I can give you the numbers. In the US, if you look at the CDC site, which I've recently done for this report, I think they say 13 or 14% is general US number of all cancers could be caused by viral agents or bacterial agents or parasites. The WHO, which seems to be a bit smarter, and it's dealing with emerging nations as well as with the United States, says twice that many. So they're approaching a third. They're saying like 30%.
They say 30%, yeah.
So, but I'll say it again, even no matter who you're looking at, I don't think they're anywhere close to understanding the real numbers.
So are you trying to update your bet now?
No, I'm going to stay in the 66 range. I think 2/3 is probably, if you allow for the various ways that a virus, for instance, can cause trouble and lead to cancer, it isn't just direct infection. That's number one, let's say. There's also, it can cause inflammation, and inflammation can lead to cancer. And then it can also cause other problems with your immune system, and that can lead to cancer. So there are various ways viruses and bacteria could act that result in cancer without being direct cause. They can be indirect cause. And if you add those together, I think I'm probably pretty safe at 2/3.
Okay. All right. We'll take your word for it for now.
Right. Okay.
So you mentioned there's a difference in the rates of perceived infection-based cancers in the U.S. versus in developing countries. What's going on there?
Hard to know when you're comparing the medical establishments of emergent nations, Africa or somewhere else, with places like Europe or the United States. But there are some really deep research-related problems here, I think. So the simple answer that you'll be told on the web would be there are more infections, period, in emerging nations, and that's the answer. All right, probably true. But here's what happened when I tried to do a deep dive through the CDC on this question. I went to the CDC. I found all the lists of all the cancers that they agree are caused by bacteria or by viruses or by parasites. And then you do a deeper dive. You go, okay, well, now how does the research work on this? you find out, let's say you're a frontline doctor in Missouri somewhere, and you have somebody who's got cancer and you think there's some interrelationship there. You go to the CDC site, it tells you which and only which cancers are caused by a bug. You then decide, based on what you were told by their website, whether or not that person has it, and you file a report saying what they told you to say without actually doing any research.
So under the current medical process, there's no way to identify new types of cancer.
They could, but it's not encouraged. It's not like, how do you put it? It seems to me as though it's a bit circular. And, I think doctors who are on the front lines are just doing what they're told instead of perhaps being more aggressive in their search for answers. It is true in general that medical doctors are not research scientists.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't really understand that.
Yeah, but they don't have time to be.
At a time. And so their reporting may generate the numbers that we're talking about today. And at the same time, I think we can confidently say they're the wrong numbers.
Mm-hmm.
They're undercounting.
Interesting.
I'll give you an example, Berit. Let's go back to HPV for a second. So with HPV, it's treated like an STD, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So immediately out of the box, you've got a problem. It's only if you got a vaccine, it's only for one type of HPV, period. And there are 150 types. 150.
Mm-hmm.
You can only get that one. Okay, so fine, that's the STD story, done. And then you find out, actually there are, I'll make up a known number, which is probably going to be like 8 to 12 cancers that are caused by HPV somehow or other. And it turns out also HPV can team up with other things like chlamydia maybe or something else and cause cancer as in a dual way, enabling way somehow. Well, how many of the 150 HPV variants, right?
Right.
It could actually be correlated with some kind of cancer. I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows. So, there's a problem there. And that's a pretty good example, I think, of a even larger issue, which has to do with other viruses and other bacteria.
So, okay, given this hypothesis that you have, how does that adjust the average person, their approach to thinking about cancer diagnosis, or what should a normal person do about this?
Never go outside and don't lick your fingers. It's a more dangerous world without good answers in terms of today. But I think there's a happy story here, which is if this hypothesis is correct and people can do the research much more broadly, maybe we'll help that happen and identify the correlations between various cancers and various bugs. We've gotten so good during the last 2 years at making vaccines,
right,
that you can imagine an era that's not too far in the future when medical researchers, like we've already done with COVID, could very quickly, like within weeks or months, create vaccines for multiple cancers, and then give them to whoever wants them. And one of the really big fails, in my opinion, about current administration of vaccines like the HPV vaccine is not only that it's the wrong vaccine, just for one instead of for many, but it's only given to kids. And in fact, in the medical profession, it's called out of protocol if you are older and you want to get a shot.
Right.
There is a shot. I think it's an 11-valent shot of HPV, where at least 11 of those 150 variants are addressed, right? Well, you'd have to get your doctor to specially request and give you special permission to go out of protocol because you're too old to be allowed. You're not 11 years old to be allowed to have that. And I think that's just wrong in so many different ways that
Right.
it should be allowed for older people. It shouldn't be reduced only to the practice of STD passage. It ought to be about anti-cancer in general. And the
other thing that I was told when I was growing up was that if you have already had HPV in general, you can't have the HPV vaccine.
Right.
So what you're saying is that that would also be kind of garbage because there are at least 11 kinds of HPV in that vaccine. And an individual might have had one of those kinds or two of those kinds, even, and the vaccine would still be useful for the other 8 kinds.
True. And I'll ask you one more fun question in the same path. COVID. Now, what were they saying? They said, "Oh, if you've already had, then don't have a booster shot, or don't have a." Wait a minute, I got to understand this. Really? Are you sure? Because it awfully much seems like the government's telling us we should have many, many shots for COVID. But I guess that's different because it's different. Anyway, I'm making fun of them, but I don't trust any part of that.
All right. So if you're an individual, you can go to your doctor and beg them for an HPV vaccine, which may be able to help in some cases your own potential for cancer moving forward.
Yes.
What about like the rest of the world? So are there things that you would recommend other parts, other aspects of the medical industry do or work on or think about or focus on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we just covered it. No, I hope that maybe we get something started here, at least with the next GR and with this podcast, and get people interested in making more aggressive studies of which cancers correlate with which bugs, and then B, start manufacturing many, not one, but many different vaccines that can be multivalent and put together into one shot, maybe, or 2 shots or 3 shots. And imagine a time not too long from now where no matter how old you are, whether you're 10 or whether you're 70, you can get a shot or 5 shots, what do you want, and get a much increased protection against getting cancer.
Well, if you're wildly not if your hypothesis is correct, right, and it is the case, the potential benefit would be up to 3/4 or 2/3 protection against cancer.
Yeah.
Which is huge.
You could protect against 2/3 of the cancers that are out there.
So I'm going to close with a a softball question for you, because I suspect you have a good answer for this, because in addition to writing next week's global report and acting as the CEO of Strategic News Service, you also run a company called Pattern Computer in your spare time. And I'm curious how you all are thinking about this problem.
Well, Pattern has not approached this question yet, although it's been suggested recently that we do. So I think I'll take this back to our team at Pattern, see if they're interested, and if there's enough data in the public, libraries available where we could actually do some runs and check for patterns of correlation. I think we'd love to do that, and that might be a further inspiration to other researchers who are better qualified to look this up. But I can also tell you, Berit, I don't know if you know this, but we started a little club now where I live called the Trailblazers. And it's my friends and I.
Is it just you guys in the garage injecting each other with HPV vaccines?
Kind of like that. So we have a doctor who we really like here, and he has agreed to give us all prescriptions for multivalent HPV. And some of us have gone over to the mainland, as they say, to a large grocery store and gotten HPV shots just recently.
Wow!
And so we're trying to start a bow wave of interest in doing this.
So you're really eating your own dog food in this.
Eating your own dog food, and my hope is that it'll be inspiring to other people to do the same thing. I'm not a doctor, and I'm not saying anybody will benefit from this medically. I can't say that. But I'm doing it.
At the very least, it would reduce your chances of getting HPV.
True, and 11 different types.
If there was no causation.
I don't think there's any downside here. The shot doesn't hurt, and that's it. I think it's not very expensive. That's not cheap, but it's not very expensive. And if it turns out that it's a life or death thing and you got it right, wow, take it.
Yeah.
So this is just the first, it's almost a political step in a sense, but I think it's a smart move.
It's a personal, it's not just a political step. It's a personal health step, right?
It is.
Hey, I think that there is enough behind this that I am willing to, that I want to go out and get this for myself, even though it is not widely accepted medical practice.
That's right. And if it were possible for me to get 4 more shots, each of which were for 11 kinds of cancer, wow, I'd do it.
Yeah.
I'd do it. So that's kind of where the medicine is, I think, on it. And I'm just hoping to inspire other people to get on the train.
Well, I'm inspired.
Yeah, well, my buddies are inspired. They're all lining up now, which is pretty funny. You can become a trailblazer too.
I will.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you for this conversation. It's been super interesting. And it also bears the distinct honor of being the first video podcast I've ever made with my dad about HPV.
Probably the last.
In addition to our professional connections.
Yeah. Thank you. That was fun.
Yeah.
So with the global report on this comes out next week, and we hope you'll all read the SNS Global Report.